How's it going?
Good evening, everyone. Welcome once again to the Trad Queen Story Hour. Thank you all very much for joining me. I had some exciting news I wanted to share with you this evening. This is Google Podcasts, and this is the Sour Patch, which I was not aware of this until today because I'm trying to figure out how to get my podcast on all platforms. But I have been religiously uploading episodes of Trad Queen Story Hour to my Substack, which is just Lydia Lederman at substack.com. And it turns out that that's putting that directly on to Google Podcasts. So if you go into Google Podcasts, or I think any podcast platform you use, and just type in The Sour Patch, you'll be able to find episode 92, James O'Keefe out at Project Veritas, Meghan Markle wants privacy, MTG calls for national divorce. Very cool. I've actually been listening to it lately, and it sounds great. I'm really excited that it's available on these platforms, and I hope that you guys will join me in subscribing to this. I'm looking to grow my voice, and I'm really interested in reaching out to people. I'm excited to be bringing guests on in the future. That's something Andy and I are working on too. We have a lot of different side projects and a lot of different directions this show is probably going to go, but in whatever direction we decide to take it, it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm really glad you guys are along for the ride. Speaking of being along for the ride, my poll today is about happiness versus purpose. And I asked that question because I found this interesting article from Forbes that says, don't chase happiness if you want to be happy. This is from a new study that came out in June of last year. I thought it was fascinating. A new study published in Current Opinion in Behavioral Sciences explained that obsessively focusing on happiness or the lack thereof might be a permanent obstacle in your pursuit of it. Instead, accepting your emotions as they are gives you a far better shot at unlocking true happiness. And I think there's no other option except for that to be correct, because I personally don't think that happiness is a good measure of human fulfillment, purpose, meaning. I think that purpose and meaning are much better metrics of whether a person is going to have a fulfilled life. And it's kind of complicated because these words overlap a lot. But Jordan Peterson talks about how at the end of the day, you should consider yourself lucky if you sit down and you think just for 5 minutes that you feel happy, because a majority of the rest of the time you spend as an adult is going to be not necessarily outright happy, but it's significantly better. Your human experience will be better, objectively better, if you are working on something that gives you a great deal of meaning. For example, for me, talking to you guys gives me a great deal of meaning. It gives me a sense of fulfillment. I really like the idea of making a difference to even one person out there. I think that's really cool. And I'm really glad that I have this platform. I'm, again, as I always say, really grateful that you guys are there. Let's read a little bit more of this. People who value happiness to an extreme degree are less likely to attain happiness in both the short term and the long term, explains psychologist Felicia Zerwas of the University of California, Berkeley. One reason scientists think that valuing happiness might backfire is because it might lead people to feel more disappointed at times when happiness is most within reach. That's right. I think that goes right in line with our social media experience, because I think what's happening is that we get really, really close to this ephemeral happiness and we're like, oh, well, I'm not as happy as Susan is. I'm not as happy as Mark is. I can see all their pictures on social media. They're talking about how great their life is, and I'm just not there. So it really is true that comparison is the thief of joy, and social media brings us nothing but comparison, which makes me think that overall it's really not a net good. Andy, thank you so much for joining me here in the chat. Always enjoy having him here. Oh, I need to retweet him. So let's do that now. We're going to scroll up. He always asks me to retweet him when I'm right in the middle of getting everything ready to go. Let's see what today's tweet says. Tune in live right now for Trad Queen Story Hour with Sour Patch Lids. Tonight, hair care techniques for the vaccinated. That is not at all what we're doing here, but thank you, Andy. I will retweet that for sure. We are going to be talking about vaccination, and it's not as funny as Andy's was by a long shot, unfortunately. We have some really bad news from New York, and that I had missed this from a few days ago, but we are definitely going to go over what happened there. They are bringing a lawsuit against, I believe, the city of New York City, that is, and they're really going crazy, and I think that they're going to really have a strong case. I also wanted to show you guys this video from Vivek Ramaswamy. He came to my attention shortly before I left Timcast IRL, and he seemed really interesting. He wrote a book about woke corporations. I'm really interested to hear what he has to say. So let's look at this one. He is talking about hiring practices, which is certainly something that he knows a lot about. So let's listen here. Let me turn this up. Make sure this is all as high as it can be so you can hear it.
In this country, a new American movement in this country that unleashes the experiment that we unleashed 250 years ago, starting again today. There's 4 elements to it I'm going to leave you with today before we wrap. And the first of those is probably the most important. It is to restore our culture of free speech in America. Free speech is important. The pursuit of truth depends on not censoring the wrong ideas, because if we censor that which we think is wrong, we will soon discover that some of those wrong ideas turned out to be the right ones in the end. Free speech is a precondition for peace in this country. Because you know what? If you tell people they cannot speak, they will scream. If you tell people they cannot scream, that is when they will start tearing things down. That is why we need to revive free speech for the sake of peace itself in a divided body politic. And it starts not with big tech censorship. I don't call it that anymore. I call it what it is. It starts with government tech censorship, where these companies are working hand in glove with the party in power in the United States to censor speech and content through the back door that government could not censor through the front door under the Constitution. Well, you know what I say? If it is state action in disguise, then the Constitution still applies. These companies ought to be bound by the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States when they are working with the government to do the government's own dirty work through the back door. Thank you.
He is, of course, not wrong. Now, in the body of this tweet, he says if you can't fire someone for being black or gay or Muslim or Hindu or Jewish or whatever, then you shouldn't be able to fire someone for being an outspoken conservative either. Make political expression a civil right in America. I think he's really onto something, because from my understanding, the only place that political belief is, let me see if I can find this, political belief is a civil right in, I think it's in Washington, D.C. Let's see if we can find this. Protected traits in D.C. The D.C. Office of Human Rights enforces the D.C. Human Rights Acts, which makes discrimination illegal based on 23 protected states. Lost my ability to speak there. Let's see if we can find, I think it's political affiliation. Yeah, political affiliation. The state of belonging to or endorsing any political party. And that means, yes, Vivek Ramaswamy is correct. You should be able to verbalize your views without fear of being fired or not hired. I think that's a great point. I'm really glad he brought that up because I haven't heard anybody else bring that up for sure. Another thing that I wanted to do before we really get started here is mention, because I said I would keep you guys up to date on this one, and I know it might get me demonetized, but I wanted to mention it. The SCOTUS has again denied hearing a 2020 election case alleging Biden, Harris, and lawmakers ignored fraud. This is the second petition denied. Moving on to Plan C, the petitioner, Roland Brunson, wrote. I don't know if you guys recall, but it was a very interesting case saying that if these people were complicit in any kind of fraud, then they should be removed from office. Now, it was certainly a bold strategy, and it doesn't appear it's going to pan out, but it was very interesting, and I'm curious if other cases like this are brought forward. Just wanted to mention that before we get rolling. Now, this is what I really wanted to talk about because I found this to be shocking. When I first saw this, I could not believe it, and I had to look it up myself. And it is from Valentine's Day, this particular article from Outkick, which is based on an article from Fox, which I refuse to use because they don't like the fact that I use an ad blocker on my browser. Fingerprints of unvaccinated New York teachers reportedly sent to the FBI. My first question, and I think everyone's first question really would be, Who sent it? But let's read the article. New York City engaged in repeated discrimination against unvaccinated workers during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, I know that's editorialization from Outkick, but I think that's pretty verifiably true. But its efforts to mandate individual behavior may have been even more inexcusable than previously realized. Previously. Copy editor Outkick, come on guys. According to a report from Fox News, the fingerprints of unvaccinated teachers were sent to the FBI with, quote, problem code flags. And we're going to look this up, so don't worry about that. One of the lawyers representing fired teachers suing the city over the mandates revealed that unvaccinated teachers now have a, quote, flag in their file. So this must be something to do with the hiring process for teachers. That flag could potentially impact their ability to get hired elsewhere. Wow, this is literally threatening the way that people earn their livelihood. That is insane. When the city puts these problem codes on employees who have been terminated because of their unconstitutional politics, not only do they have this flag in their files, but their fingerprints are sent with that flag to the FBI and the New York Criminal Justice Services, so it impacts their ongoing ability to get employment at other places. Bursch said recently. Did we miss Bursch's first name? We must have. Interesting. One of the lawyers. Yeah, okay, so that must be one of the lawyers representing the fired teachers. That's too bad. One of the affected teachers appeared on Fox and Friends first recently and expressed outrage at the staggering overreach. Indeed, I am outraged as well. This is both outrageous and infuriating because my first question to the government or whatever is basically, what did I do? What kind of criminal activity did I participate in besides denying something that I felt was right for me? Rochelle Garcia said, religiously, mentally, I just don't want anything experimental in my body. So what criminal activity does that persist? I'm not sure that's the right word for that, but you get the gist of what she's saying. I don't understand, why am I being flagged? Why is my fingerprint being sent to the FBI? Honestly, this is right in line with the Biden administration making a note that parents who simply show up at committee meetings, school committee meetings, are possible terrorists. This is in exactly the same lines. Unvaccinated employees were targeted. Another investigative journalist, Betsy Combier, submitted an affidavit explaining how the local education department was able to allegedly flag teachers. I found out that the DOE has right now an agency called the Office of Personnel Investigation, and what they do is they have employees of the DOE who, forgive me, call themselves investigators, but they're not, she said. So they work for OPI, and when they get an accusation from anybody, it doesn't matter who, the principals send it to them, but the original complaint against somebody could be made by anyone that that employee did something wrong. These problem codes were used against unvaccinated teachers, and without a submitted vaccination card was hit with an immediate flag sent to the FBI and Department of Justice. Wow. So not just the FBI, but the Biden administration's Department of Justice. That's crazy. This isn't too surprising coming from a city that just recently ended vaccine mandates years after they were disproven. The state has not addressed these concerns, leading to calls for an investigation. Even some city employees, according to the Fox report, are outraged by the allegations. If the city did in fact send private information with a problem code to the FBI, it is undeniably concerning and once again shows how COVID was used as an excuse by governments and politicians to engage in inexcusable overreach. Misinformation from experts on the ability of the vaccines to stop the virus immediately turned to executive action. Politicians imposed mandates based on inaccurate misconceptions of vaccine efficacy. Those mandates were enforced religiously by committed local authorities and administrators. The human cost was borne by individuals who lost their livelihoods, among other inexcusable consequences. Now it turns out that the undesirable, quote, unvaccinated may have been punished with even more extreme methods. And given Mayor Adams' recent comments, COVID extremists like New York may never be done. This is incredibly discouraging and it's incredibly alarming because this puts all of the conspiracy theorists in a new light because for a long time now, people that I always personally kind of consider to be conspiratorial were constantly talking about how the government was going to have a record of everything you did, everywhere you went. And I always kind of rolled my eyes. I was like, we have our phones, we have TikTok, we're being tracked in every way, 9 ways from Sunday. It doesn't matter what we do. We're constantly going to be like tracked, and it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really make a huge difference if the government knows about it or not. Like, I was always just laboring under the impression that the government pretty much knew everything about everything I did all the time. It was just kind of a given. I felt like we just kind of lived in a surveillance state no matter what we do, to the point where you can't so much as buy a donut without somebody having eyes on you, like literally camera footage of you buying that donut. But I am genuinely concerned by this because it appears that they are actually going to keep tabs on people who do things with which they politically disagree. And I am going to tell you right now that it is very important who wins the election in 2024, because I do not think that this can continue and the United States remain a coherent, cogent country. I suspect something along the lines of what Marjorie Taylor Greene was calling for the other day may happen. I think it would probably happen organically. I think that the policies that red states impose on their own states versus policies that blue states adopt will divide a sharp line down the middle of the United States. It's difficult because we like to be able to travel back and forth between states. But then I was thinking about this further, and I was like, hey, you know what? There's actually something called the Schengen zone, the Schengen area in over in Western Europe, where you can go from country to country without needing your passport. And it's understood that you have all kinds of business, maybe in Germany, maybe in France, and you can travel from one to the next with no issues at all. And I was thinking, why would it be any different here? But the problem then becomes, like we were talking about yesterday, the blue state policies that inevitably leak into these red states, and the people who move from blue states to red states then inevitably tend to vote their exact same values no matter where they end up. And that's why you saw states like Colorado gradually turn completely blue because of voters from California. People were disgusted with what was happening in California, and for whatever reason, never able to make the connection between what box they checked during election season and what ended up happening throughout the rest of the year. And they just came to Colorado and they're like, oh, well, why do you guys not vote the same way I do? Pfft, come on, man. Aren't you cool like me? I'm super compassionate and hipster. Come on, be like me. It'll be great. And then they encourage people around them to vote this way, and they vote this way, and they get a foot in the door, and then they gradually get the city of Denver looking like the city of San Francisco. It's honestly disgusting. Last time I was there, I really felt like I was in somewhere in California, which was genuinely upsetting to me because I really cared about that state, because I was a native and I lived there for 28 plus years, almost 29 years. And I was so disturbed to see what happened to it. So I don't think that the idea of red states just doing their own thing and blue states just doing their own thing is going to work out exactly like we think it will. I think we're going to need to come to different kinds of terms on this. I think it's going to require a great deal of political sacrifice on both sides, but it's very challenging because we know that the right has made a lot of sacrifices of their own to their own detriment in favor of trying to assuage the left and just saying we're going to go along to get along, just let people do whatever they want. And it's led us to exactly where we are now. I personally remember the GOP as being, first of all, the party that didn't like the devil's music and all that stuff. I thought that kind of censorship was dumb. I did not like that stuff. I was never on board with that. But then they were also very much the party of go along to get along and be nice and just do whatever to make sure that nobody likes you or nobody dislikes you and nobody's going to smack talk you. And Aaron McIntyre, I think, summarized it perfectly when he said that the side that wants to be left alone will always lose to the side that wants to win. And it's just common sense. Wanting to be left alone is a negative stance. Wanting to win is a positive stance. The positive beats the negative every time. It's disturbing, but I'm afraid that's exactly what we're seeing now. We said, you know what? I don't care what people do in their free time. And then people decided that they should dress up like women and go and read stories to children in the library. And suddenly we were like, wait a second, those are our kids. Why are you doing that? And teachers are doing all this crazy stuff. We were like, we don't care what goes on in your bedroom. We don't care what you do behind closed doors. And honestly, I don't believe that we should. But at the same time, if that all of that leaks out into the general culture eventually. And that's something that we need some kind of cultural discouragement of this kind of behavior that I think that the blue states really don't get. And I'm not sure how to fix that. So if you guys have ideas, let me know. It's very challenging. I wish that the US could divide peacefully from one another. And I wish that red states would be able to maintain their own policies, no matter what people from California try to make them do. Anyway, that was a little bit of a tangent. Let me see what you guys are thinking. Thank you guys very much for joining me. Andy says individuals need to start taking responsibility for the tech we use and what kinds of information we tolerate being collected about us. I completely agree. Now, this is kind of in line with my comment about feeling like I live in a surveillance state. I really don't like feeling like that, but unfortunately, I don't think there's any way out of it. I think the government is too big. I think they're everywhere. I think they have tabs on everything. I mean, they monitor our cars. They keep track of, where we park during the day. They have a link to our phones. They have a backdoor into all of our social media. It's just, I don't know. It feels like it's too far gone and I'm not sure what to do about it, but we cannot give up hope by any means. We're going to keep fighting, but we'll just have to find some alternative methods of, for example, communicating with each other. And if that means going back to flip phones, I am okay with that. I think we should make it happen for sure. With purpose/meaning and clarity of vision, with hard work and perseverance comes happiness. That's a great way to summarize that. I don't think that happiness is a good end goal for us to pursue. I think we should be pursuing something else along the way, like helping and supporting others. And then we might be shocked at how happy that makes us. Greg says red states have blue cities. That is the problem. River city liberals exist anywhere where there is a hub. Life is easier there. Yeah, I think you're correct. And I've talked a lot about this with some of my friends. I've asked, why does this happen in cities? And the fact of the matter is, when you live so close to other people, it's very important that you have that structure and you have the support of the environs, which means you're going to be looking to leaders like mayors and city administrators, and you're going to be more likely to tattle on your neighbors if they do something that affects you or something that the city tells you will affect you. So the whole mindset in a city is completely different than it is out in the country. Yeah, you're right. And I'm not sure how to unpack this issue because you are correct, of course. But the downside is that there are so many positives to living in a city. There's a great source of culture, there's art, there's friends and neighbors really nearby, there's food, there's music, there's all sorts of good stuff. There's lots of churches, you can meet new friends, there are places for your kids to go, and it's just difficult to determine whether the pros outweigh the cons. Johnny says, this is why I like older cars that have less tech, that someone can't remote control while I'm driving and make it crash and call it an accident. Entirely correct. My car is almost 10 years old for that exact reason. It's not as old as I would have liked for it to have been. My first car was a 1977 Chevy Camaro, and I loved it very much. And ever since then, I've bought older cars. I think the next car I bought was a 2001, then a 1995, and then finally I have a 2014, which is certainly the youngest car I've ever owned. The problem with national divorce is that there's no clean way of doing it. There are red cities in blue states and blue cities in red states. That's right. I'm not sure how to do it cleanly. There has to be something that makes the majority of people happy, and I see no way of getting there, unfortunately. That is Surenko. Dickie Mo says, if there's a divorce, red states need a new constitution which makes socialism and communism illegal. That's a good idea. Johnny says, this is why I like, older cars. Yep, correct. Stuart says, communicate, the like button, subscribe, and share. Yes, 100%. The pets are relying on you. Dip and Dot both need all of your attention, sharing, liking, and subscribing. Now we're going to turn our attention to Donald Trump, whose latest comments are about the transgender craze. And we're going to touch on some other people who have thoughts on this as well as I think the New York Times. Yes, this headline I'm going to need you guys' help to unpack because it's crazy. This is from Just the News. Trump pledges, if reelected, to end federal programs promoting gender transition. I will sign new executive order instructing every federal agency to cease all programs that promote, the concept of sex and gender transition at any age, Trump said. Wow, that's bold. Former President Trump says if reelected, he will end President Biden's policies on gender-affirming care, and sign an executive order instructing federal agencies to end all programs promoting gender transition. I will revoke Joe Biden's cruel policies on so-called gender-affirming care. Gender-affirming, a process that results in the physical mutilation of minor children? Trump said this on Monday in Palm Beach, Florida, at an event for Club 45 USA, which bills itself as the nation's largest club of Trump supporters. I will sign a new executive order instructing every federal agency to cease all programs that promote the concept of sex and gender transition at any day. It's enough, Trump also said. During his first year in the White House, he banned transgender people from enlisting in the military and ordered the Defense Department to stop funding gender reassignment surgeries except for those already in progress. Republican lawmakers introduced a similar ban on transgender service members last week. I think this is great. This is a big part of the culture war that I think Trump would be wise to focus on instead of attacking his other Republicans. If he were elected and this were to be passed, I would be strongly in favor of it 100%. But at the same time, we also know that a lot of these red states are already passing bills that do this to some degree or another. But I am very glad he's talking at the federal level. It's a very good idea. Andy says, like, comment, subscribe, share with your friends in all caps so you know he is very serious. Let's turn now to J.K. Rowling. And I actually really wanted to pull up an article about how she used to be super woke because I've said it before and I'll say it again. J.K. Rowling and the New York Times have made the bed they are now sleeping in. They were 100% in favor of all of these policies that they don't now approve of, and they are being dragged over the coals for it, and it's their own fault. And I kind of feel bad for them. I'm glad they're in our corners on these issues, but at the same time, man, you feed this alligator. Don't be surprised when it tries to eat you. J.K. Rowling says, I don't walk around thinking about my legacy. What a pompous way to live. J.K. Rowling says she's not uncomfortable with getting off my pedestal as she addresses the Trans Row in Witch Trials podcast. Podcast looks at the life of J.K. Rowling and her beliefs on transgender rights. I never set out to upset anyone, she said on the Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling. She said she was not uncomfortable getting off her pedestal. Speaking on the Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, with the first 2 episodes released today, the author can be heard saying she never set out to upset anyone as she discusses controversial remarks made about transgender rights. Rowling has been criticized for her staunch views on gender identity, but has strongly denied accusations of transphobia. I'm not transphobic either, but I don't believe that trans women are women. The podcast episode titled Chapter 1, Plotted in Darkness, opened with Rowling addressing the backlash she received after sharing her views on gender identity, saying, I never set out to upset anyone, however, I am not uncomfortable with getting off my pedestal. And what has interested me in the last 10 years, and certainly in the last few years, particularly on social media, you've ruined your legacy, oh, you could have been beloved forever, but you chose to say this. And I think you could not have misunderstood me more profoundly. I do not walk around my house thinking about my legacy. What a pompous way to live your life. Walking around thinking about my legacy will be. Whatever. I'll be dead. I care about now. I care about the living. That's fair. It's a very terse analysis. In June 2020, the author wrote an essay in which she expressed deep concerns about the consequences of trans activism. J.K. Rowling also revealed in the podcast that her abusive ex-husband hid the manuscript for the first Harry Potter novel in a bid to stop her from leaving him. The author said Portuguese TV reporter Jorge Arantes kept the pages of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone like a hostage, and she feared he would burn them. After discovering where the manuscript was, she secretly started photocopying a few pages each day to ensure her work would not be lost. Very smart. The Harry Potter author also opened up about having a hugely traumatic miscarriage and the death of her mother. Oh, this is very sad. The 57-year-old writer sat down with U.S. writer Megan Phelps-Roper at her home in Edinburgh to discuss her life, including her views on the transgender community. Rowling married Arantes in 1992 after meeting him in a bar in Portugal where she had moved to work as a teacher following her mother's death. The couple had a daughter, Jessica, now 29, but she left in 1993 after Arantes dragged her out of their home and attacked her. My goodness. She said, the marriage had turned very violent and very controlling. He was searching my handbag every time I came home, and I didn't have a key to my own front door. It was a horrible state of tension to live in because I had to act as though I wasn't going, and I don't think I'm a very good actor. That's a terrible way to live, and yet the manuscript kept growing. I had continued to write. He knew what the manuscript meant to me because at a point he took the manuscript and hid it. That was his hostage. That is terrible. That is a hallmark of an abusive relationship. You don't want to be in a position where your partner or spouse is emotionally controlling you. When I realized I was definitely going to go, I would take a few pages of the manuscripts into work every day, just a few pages so he wouldn't realize anything was missing, and I would photocopy it. Gradually, in the cupboard in the staff room, bit by bit, a photocopied manuscript grew and grew because I suspected that if I wasn't able to get out with everything, he would burn it or take it and hold it hostage. That manuscript meant so much to me, and it was the thing that I prioritized saving. The only thing I prioritized beyond that was my daughter, but at that point she was still inside me, so she is as safe as she can be in that situation. That's still a very tough situation because an abusive partner can certainly cause problems to a pregnant lady. I am very glad that she holds this position, and I'm very glad that she seems to be fully in support of truth at this point. I'm only sorry that she spent any period of her life in favor of this kind of woke censorship. I honestly trust that her red pilling has been an indicator to other people who think like she did, that this is not a good sign, that there's no good direction that this can go. Hopefully she has alerted people to the fact that this is a huge issue and must be stopped in its tracks. It's not transphobic to be in search of the truth. And I tweeted earlier today that it's not possible to be a trans-inclusive feminist because people like J.K. Rowling are constantly labeled TERFs. This is trans exclusionary radical feminists. And this is a term used by trans activists in an attempt to slander people like J.K. Rowling and describe her as a horrific person whose words are causing great violence. Now, we on the right understand that words themselves don't cause violence, but the left, in their postmodern haze, is attempting to convince everyone that words are just as violent, if not more so, than actual physical actions, which explains why they were fine with the 2020 Summer of Love. They did not see any issue at all with the sacking of a bunch of cities across the United States. But when it comes to mean words, well, those words themselves are actually violence, and you should be prohibited from expressing the views that they do not personally approve of. I think that what's going to happen with the left is that they're going to continue to splinter and fracture and become more intersectional until the snake eats itself. Now, I was originally really stupidly optimistic that we would return to the smallest minority, which was the individual, as Ayn Rand says. But I don't think that's going to be the case anymore. I think they're just going to continue to shatter and fracture until they are no more, until basically they turn into dust and disappear. And like that article we read yesterday talked about how Gen Z is really getting sick of this, I am optimistic that that will be the case certainly going forward. It is very exhausting to be thinking about this stuff all the time. It is, and it is certainly the hallmark of a very wealthy person with a lot of spare money and a lot of spare time to be able to sit around and think about how oppressed they are or how oppressed others are. Normal people who work normal jobs and lead normal lives don't have that kind of time. People who are raising kids certainly don't have that kind of time, unless they've chosen to prioritize this above their kids, and some people certainly have, unfortunately. Now, we're going to look at the most confusing headline of all time, and I'm going to see if you guys can help me unpack this, because I don't get it. This is from Vanity Fair, and it says, dozens of New York Times journalists hit staff union for its defense of trans coverage criticism. So they're defending the criticism of the trans coverage. Okay, I think I'm tracking. Some of the paper's top reporters signed a letter objecting to the Guild's response to newsroom leaders. We ask that our union work to advance, not erode, our journalistic independence, they wrote. Okay, at this point, I'm still not entirely sure what they're talking about, so let's read on. Hopefully this is well enough written that we can reach some kind of conclusion. A group of high-profile New York Times journalists on Tuesday privately fired back against News Guild of New York President Susan DeCarava over a letter that she'd written affirming journalists' rights to criticize the paper to address workplace conditions, a response that came amid a dispute over the Times' coverage of transgender issues. Okay, so far really not clearing this up. Okay, a letter she wrote affirming journalists' right to criticize the paper. Journalists 100% always, always, always have the right to criticize the paper that they write for. Period. 100%. It's objectively true, and I don't think that anyone can argue with that except trans activists. So let's read on. Factual, accurate journalism that is written, edited, and published in accordance with time standards does not create a hostile workplace, reads the letter, which was organized by reporter Jeremy Peters and in the past 24 hours collected dozens of signatures. Good for them. Among them are Peter Baker, Charlie Savage, Adam Goldman, Michael Grinbaum, Apurva Mandavila, Lisa Lehrer, Jim Rutenberg, Mike McIntyre, and Kate Zernicke. Your letter appears to suggest a fundamental misunderstanding of our responsibilities as journalists. Regretfully, our own union leadership now seems determined to undermine the ethical and professional protections that we depend on to guard the independence and integrity of our journalism, the letter says. Okay, well, I might take slight issue with the idea that a New York Times journalist is independent in any way, because I happen to know they are all pretty much 100% lockstep with far left-leaning agendas. But let's continue. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt because they seem to be attempting to try to do a good thing here. Every day, partisan actors seek to influence, attack, or discredit our work. We accept that. But what we don't accept is what the Guild appears to be endorsing, a workplace in which any opinion or disagreement about Times coverage can be recast as a matter of workplace conditions. We are journalists, not activists. That line should be clear. Oh, it should be. You should probably tell the rest of your colleagues. Tuesday's letter is the latest in a series of exchanges, the first being one signed by hundreds of Times contributors and several current staffers last week. That letter criticized the paper's coverage of transgender issues, citing specific stories and who wrote them. So this was very much a struggle session. Calling out specific authors and specific articles is very much a case of naming and shaming. The letter criticized not just the style in which this was covered, but the fact that it was covered at all, which should be the biggest red flag you can possibly hold up. Executive editor Joe Kahn and opinion editor Kathleen Kingsbury addressed that letter internally in an email to staff, taking issue with the staffers who joined the effort. We do not welcome and will not tolerate participation by Times journalists in protests organized by advocacy groups or attacks on colleagues on social media and other public forums. Good. That is a high professional standard that every company should adhere to. Noting that participation in such a campaign is against the letter and spirit of our ethics policy. I would like to read their ethics policy because I'm pretty sure they violate it on a regular basis. This is, after all, the New York Times we're talking about. This letter came out the same day that the opinion section published a column defending J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter author who has been repeatedly criticized for comments viewed as transphobic. Vanity Fair is handling this relatively unbiasedly. DeCarava then sent a letter which was posted to the internal Times Guild listserv, responding to Kahn and Kingsbury's email as reported by Semaphore, in which she wrote that employees are protected in collectively raising concerns that conditions of their employment constitute a hostile work environment. This was a concern explicitly raised in the letter at issue here. Some staffers took DeCarava's letter as an affront, particularly as it relates to the Times' journalistic independence. Yes, activists take anything as an affront. I would hope that the New York Times would be learning that lesson right about now. As Semaphore's Max Tani reported, one reporter, Stephanie Saul, wrote in the Times Union Slack over the weekend, criticism of workplace conditions does not include attacking the journalism of other members. I strongly object to this letter, and I would hope other members of the unit agree with me. The problem here is that it's so confusing because there is more than one letter, and anybody at any given time over the course of this article could be referring to either different letter. As Tuesday's letter was coming together, the Guild scheduled a town hall meeting for 5 p.m. on Tuesday where they will certainly address the objections raised by some of their members. Tuesday's full letter is below. Dear Susan, we are writing you privately in response to your February 17th letter, which we were surprised to see. Like you, we support the right to a non-hostile workplace where everyone is respected and supported. We believe the New York Times should never engage in biased or discriminatory practices of any kind. We all strive to be part of a truly diverse news organization where everyone is treated fairly. We welcome robust, respectful, critical feedback from colleagues, either in direct conversation or through internal Times channels. But your letter appears to suggest a fundamental misunderstanding of our responsibilities as journalists. Regretfully, our own union leadership now seems determined to undermine the ethical and professional protections that we depend on to guard the independence and integrity of our journalism. Factual, accurate journalism that is written, edited, and published in accordance with Times standards does not create a hostile workplace. Good for them. Every day, partisan actors seek to influence, attack, or discredit our work. We accept that, but what we don't accept is what the Guild appears to be endorsing, a workplace in which any opinions or disagreements about Times coverage can be recast as a matter of, quote, workplace conditions. Very much comes down to an argument about definitions, as this kind of thing often does, and I'm very glad they're using concrete terms. This is the opposite of postmodernism. Good for them. Our duty is to be independent. Okay. We pursue the facts wherever they may lead. We are journalists, not activists. That line should be clear. Sure, okay, whatever. Debates, it should be, but it's not. Debates over fairness and accuracy are perfectly reasonable. We understand and respect that the Guild has an absolute duty to offer representation to members when they are subject to discipline by management, but we do not think it is the role of our union to be engaged in and taking sides in public debates over internal editorial decisions. I respect that because I really don't like when companies air their dirty laundry and create a lot of drama over things that should have been handled internally the whole time. That's not good. Really don't like that. It's very unprofessional. It sparks a lot of drama, a lot of controversy. It enables people to take sides, point fingers, throw a lot of blame. Our hope is that in the coming days, we will find a more constructive internal dialogue among Times employees and with Guild leadership that can help unify and improve our news organization. And we ask that our union work to advance, not erode, our journalistic independence. Sincerely, all the sign-ins, and there are quite a few of them. Good for them. I am very encouraged to see that, but I am also kind of surprised and not convinced that it will last. Now, if I recall correctly, the New York Times most recently, when it came down to, let's see, New York, that's not a thing. Let's see if we can find this. Tom Cotton editorial. I believe they ended up yes. So this is the editorial that got the lead of the editorial board fired. The board lost their minds over this particular editorial from Tom Cotton, and as a result, someone ended up being fired for no reason whatsoever, other than some people's feelings who worked at the New York Times were hurt. And it's starting to feel like the New York Times is absolutely not playing that game again. And honestly, I'm very happy to see it. Hopefully they have learned from their previous mistakes. I think that they really made a bad boo-boo with that one. And hopefully they will be changing that moving forward and standing strong. I feel like it's been a case of a lot of different companies just being completely unwilling to hold any kind of actual ethical standards. There is no line in the sand anymore. It's all wishy-washy. It's like a beach that the waves have washed away all the markings. And I don't think that's going to work. And I really hope that the New York Times is kind of the beacon of leadership that some of these other companies need. And I know that a lot of this DEI stuff is being phased out at companies as the economy gets really, really bad. But I also think that the New York Times has a lot more weight to it than some of the smaller companies because it's certainly not right-leaning. So I think that they're perfectly left-wingedly positioned to be the front runners against all of this wokeness, and they have the opportunity to really make a positive difference in the world. Hopefully they're willing to stand by their beliefs permanently. I'm not convinced. I feel like they're going to waffle on this, and I feel like they're going to walk it back, but I guess we'll just have to see what happens. That'll be interesting to see for sure. Stuart Walker, thank you so much for your British super chat, £5. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy, Marcus Aurelius. I actually have that written on my desk on a little piece of paper that is a quote from him because I love him. Marcus Aurelius is one of my role models from thousands of years ago. I think he's fantastic and a very wise man, very down to earth for sure. Casey says, let the ships sink. Now, yes and no, because we all know, and it's possible that the New York Times is just starting to wake up to this because CNN is starting to wake up in the same way. We know that people don't trust the mainstream media. Like, they genuinely don't believe that the mainstream media has their best interests in mind. And I really don't blame them for thinking that at all. But it's really important that we have some kind of journalism in the world to make sure that these stories are covered and that actual power is held to actual account going forward. Oh no. Andy says, oh no, darling, you screwed up. He's from Scotland. Oh my gosh, my bad. You'll have to forgive me. I thought it was from the UK. Well, it is. Oh my gosh, the UK is so confusing. Let's see. Let's pull this up. Pull it up, Jamie. Scotland, part of the UK, I believe. Scotland is part of the UK. Countries in the United Kingdom. We had is Scotland still a part of the UK? Since 1922, the United Kingdom comprises 4 constituent countries: England, Scotland, and Wales, as well as Northern Ireland. There you go. I was correct. Technically correct. Scotland is a part of the UK. It is very confusing. You'll have to forgive me. I do have friends over in Scotland, so I plead ignorance, and I'm just going to say, just going to do that thing where I'm like, oh, I have a black friend. It doesn't work, but I'm going to pretend. Yeah, see, Stuart says, yeah, we're in the UK. Yeah, just not British. Not British at all by a long shot. All right, let's talk about this one because I just found it a little bit interesting, giving the the absolute state of the United States right now. Parents are now forking out thousands of dollars for their children to take private Russian-style math classes that tout critical thinking, reasoning, and abstract principles. This is the result of woke education. Let's continue. Russian math schools are popping up across the U.S. The schools charge thousands and teach kids as young as 5 how to do algebra. Russian schools don't teach a participation trophy philosophy. See? That's exactly what I'm talking about. The newest extra step that affluent parents are taking to give their kids a leg up when applying to Ivy League schools involves learning math in a Russian style. The style was developed during the Cold War in an attempt to give the Soviet Union an edge over the West, and that seeks to prioritize reasoning, critical thinking, and abstract principles over brute memorization. Yes, 100%. This is fantastic. Children as young as 5 are being enrolled with various different companies, including the Russian School of Mathematics, in order to learn algebra, the principles of multiplication, and the principles of multiplication, according to the New York Post. The school was founded by 2 immigrants from the Soviet Union, Irina and Inessa, I'm not even going to try to pronounce their last names, to the United States in 1997, and now has 60,000 students nationwide, charging an average of $3,000 per year. $3,000 per year doesn't sound too bad. If your kid is getting a good education in math, which is hard to come by in the U.S., that sounds like a very worthwhile investment, especially if you don't have time to teach them that stuff yourself. If she wants to be a doctor, an engineer, math will never hurt. Her math will increase the understanding of the world. The sky is the limit, said one parent. Anna, can't pronounce her last name either, whose 7-year-old daughter attends Russian math classes for 2 hours per week. This mother went on to say that after her daughter's successes in the program, she went on to sign up her son, whose development was so rapid he was able to skip the 3rd grade. There are over 70 Russian schools of mathematics locations across the U.S., including 4 in New York City alone. I kind of want to look this up now. This sounds really neat. The school's director of outreach, Masha Gershman, told the Post that students can enroll from the age of 5. Math is a tool to shape how a child thinks. Stool or tool? She said stool, it looks like. She went on to describe the growth of the school as steady. In 2019, Gershman advocated for the Russian style at a TED Talk in Boston. Good for her. That's awesome. In 2016, founder Inessa told The Atlantic in a feature titled The Math Revolution that she was inspired to start the school after she saw her own children were being taught math in American schools. I'd say to my children, forget the rules, just think. And they'd say, that's not how they teach it here. That's not what the teacher wants us to do. Rifkin said in an interview with the magazine shortly afterward that she started her school. shortly after she started her school. Sorry, this is poorly written. According to that feature, Rifkin worked as a mechanical engineer in the Soviet Union, while Kavinson, I guess that would be, was a math teacher. Rifkin also said that many of the students who passed through her classes are now working in fields that require advanced math skills such as chemistry, meteorology, and engineering. That is so wonderful. If you teach your kids strong math skills, they will literally be able to do anything they want. I think that's so cool. You teach them math and you teach them to write. And through those two things, they learn to think critically and they learn how to communicate and engage with the world. That's so cool. So I'm really glad to see this is happening. And I'm so glad that there's going to be an alternative to the way American teaching works. Because I really don't like the way American teaching is going right now. Oh my gosh, I have to show you guys this stuff. Baltimore school grades. There is a school in Baltimore. My goodness. This is a big problem. Outrage on Twitter after Baltimore reveals 0 students proficient in math across 23 schools. This is failure. It's entirely correct. Entirely. Baltimore spends $21,000 on average per student. Oh my gosh, this is why I don't like Fox. In 2022, according to Fox Baltimore. Absolutely. This is a serious issue, and I've been yelling about this forever, and no one seems to listen to me, at least not anyone who can do anything about it. Pouring money into this education system is a bad idea. This education system is broken, and it doesn't matter how much money you pour into it per student. $22,000 per student is an insane amount. Absolutely unthinkable. That's mind-boggling. And for 0% of these students to be proficient in math, unbelievable, unforgivable. The entire school system in Baltimore needs to be taken back down to the ground and built up on a philosophy of actual education, like actual understanding, with teachers who actually care about their students and who will be fired if they do not succeed. Teachers' unions should be out. This kind of participation trophy stuff should be out. This DEI stuff should be out. There should be a focus on zero violence in the schools. I don't care how you make that happen. Probably one of the things that has to be done here is there has to be an overt focus on making it cool to have a family again. Having a father in the home, having a parent at home most of the time, which means making it more affordable to live there, which means removing layers and layers of red tape around rent, around the price of living, around all of this stuff. And all of the ways they've tried to make it easier for people to live have done nothing but raise the overall cost for everyone and put kids into systems like this, where 0 students are proficient in math. That is disgusting. That's embarrassing. I'm ashamed this is happening in my country. Twitter gave the Baltimore public school system a failing grade after the city reported 0 students in 23 different schools across the city are proficient in math. 93% of 3rd through 8th graders also tested below grade level in math. The Baltimore public school system boasted a $1.6 billion budget in 2022, according to Fox Baltimore. When divided by the number of budgeted students, the average cost came out to $21,606 per student. This is infuriating. In fact, this is making me the angriest of any article we've read in a long time. Professors and political commentators expressed shock at the news and called for more freedom to allow parents to find better schools for their children. So this is where school choice comes in. This is where the Russian schools that we were just talking about would really come in handy for sure. George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley argued on Twitter that teachers are treating students less like human beings and more like captive listeners. Teachers and boards are killing the institution of public education by treating children and parents more like captives than consumers. That's correct. That's what happens when you don't give parents the option to take their kids somewhere else. This is what happens when you stifle the free market. You get 0 proficiency in the city of Baltimore across 23 schools. That cannot continue much longer before parents look for alternatives. This is a scandal, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo tweeted. Republican Senator Tim Scott slammed the government in Baltimore for leaving students behind and hurting the future of children. Failed leadership in our schools diminishes their opportunity for a brighter future. Scott also endorsed school choice, a policy that allows money normally allotted for public schools to follow students and help them go to a school of their choice. School choice expands student access to a quality education, the key to America's promise. He's not wrong. Johns Hopkins economist professor Steve Hanke summed up the failure of Baltimore schools in just 8 words. Public school failure equals unprepared students equals a dismal future. A January report from the Maryland State Department of Education revealed that math standards are rapidly sliding downward in the state as a whole. Math proficiency for grades 3 through 8 decreased from 33% in 2018 to 22% in 2021. Holy cow, this is abysmal. This is the worst I've seen anywhere. And I've been screaming for forever about the fact that you can't just pour money into a burning building, but this is exactly what they're trying to do. Disgusting. Oh my gosh, this is just genuinely upsetting to me. In middle school, only 18% of 6th grade students were proficient in math, and just 7% of students who took grade 8 assessments were proficient. That is so embarrassing. I'm just grossed out by this. This is distressing. If I were a citizen of Baltimore, I would be screaming racism at these schools like bloody murder, like you wouldn't believe. These are majority black students. From my understanding, there's a significant percentage of the population of Baltimore that is African American, and these children are being failed by the system that does not care where they go. It doesn't care what they do. It doesn't care if they succeed. In fact, they would be lying if they said they cared if their students didn't go to prison at all. Because this is what's going to happen to these students. With no math and no proper education, what are they going to do? They're not going to be working well-paying jobs. They're going to be trapped working at gas stations. They're going to be trapped in debt. They're going to be trapped working in fast food for their entire lives. They're not going to be able to afford children. They won't be able to afford rent. They won't be able to afford cars or actual homes, let alone real houses. They won't be able to help their parents retire. They'll never be able to figure out how to pay for their own retirement, so they'll be reliant on the state for everything. And maybe that's what they want. Maybe that's what the city of Baltimore is going for. I cannot believe how much money they're being given and how little they are doing with it. Are they actually setting this money on fire as they are given it? Because that's kind of what it seems like to me. Anyway, I really ranted about that, but it's infuriating to go from these Russian schools who have a no-nonsense approach and who make great progress with their students simply by treating them like human beings, by listening to them, by having a vested interest in what they do, to the city of Baltimore, where every student is failing at math, and it's genuinely disheartening to hear about. I think the only solution here is probably school choice. I think that's the only way forward. I am convinced that if you don't give parents the option to put their kids somewhere else, teachers will have no obligation to make any positive changes, and teachers' unions will continue to defend teachers who give absolutely the worst results in the entire city, who have no obligation to anyone. Anyway, Andy says, yes, technically, but I don't reckon they like being called British. Not bloody likely. Okay, all right, calm down. OCB says they're okay now without Nicola. Nicola Sturgeon, I'm assuming you're referring to. I don't know if they're going to be okay. Sargon of Akkad was talking to, I forget the name of this woman. I think her name was Helen Hale, I think is her name. Oh my gosh, I remembered a name. Good for me. Let me go into my podcast and see if that's correct. Because she was talking about how strongly religious Scotland is. Now, I personally am fully in favor of religion returning to Scotland, but we also know that they did do a great deal of witch burning, if I understand correctly from my very limited understanding of Scottish history. Why am I learning so much about Scotland lately? I'm not sure. Andy says, feel free to secede from the UK. You have my blessing. Thank you, Andy. Stuart says, no apology necessary. Username 142 says, man who defunct traditional classes would still be good. I know, it's shocking. Username 142 says, comes out to around $58 per week per kid. Johnny says, this is a real school, not the political indoctrination camps posing as schools in so many states these days. Yes, for $3,000 a year, you would be giving your kid a much better education than $22,000 a year gets them in Baltimore. That's the difference between the free market and teachers' unions. Kind of stark, I have to say. Username 142 says, well, I'm sold. My daughter's only 2, but she'd totally have traditional, no-nonsense Russian and Japanese teachers. That is a great strategy, I think. Andy's really good with a lot of this stuff. I feel like he's going to be able to teach a lot of this stuff to our kids really easily. But for all the stuff we can't quite handle or don't have time for, we're definitely going to invest in some really good teachers and make sure they have the brightest possible future, unlike these poor students in Baltimore. I feel awful for these kids. This is absolutely ruining their lives before they even had a chance to start. Wow, I definitely went long on that one. OCB says literally just crappy daycare. I'm fully inclined to agree. Username 142 says, it's no wonder Baltimore is such a dangerous crime haven. Kids can't even read in a world that revolves around the text on our phones and can't do math to see when they're getting scammed. That's a great point. Hey, there's a puppy. Hey, come here. There's a puppy down here. She came in to eat her chew toy under my chair. She's adorable. She's gotten a lot fatter since I last showed her to you guys. She doesn't like to stay still. I wanted to see if I could pick her up, but she also doesn't like to come to me, so I have to scoop her up when I have a chance. Let me see if I can get her. If I can, I'll show her to you. If not, we're just not going to worry about it. Hey, come here, come here, come here, come here. Come on, come here. Oh my gosh. Here she is. Oh my gosh, it's Dot. Oh, she's going to lick me right in the mouth like she loves to do. What do you have to say, Dot? You going to lick the microphone? She's jet black. I know, she's really hard to see. She has gotten fat. I don't know if you can see it, but she's getting wider than she is long. She's definitely growing. She's growing like a weed, and I'm happy to see it. I'm so curious how big she's going to be when she's fully grown. She's so sweet and cute, constantly licking. She still likes to try to chew on us, but she seems to understand when we say no, she needs to stop. She's a pretty good girl, and she's very smart and quick. I'm really looking forward to training her. She's already got some commands like stop, don't, come here, and all that other stuff down pretty well. Stop it. She loves bathing us with kisses. It's a lot of fun. She is a lot of fun. She's a mess, but she's a lot of fun. She's adorable. She definitely needs a crate, but she really likes to sleep in bed with us. So we are allowing her to do that. She gets her bath every day. She got her bath just yesterday. She smells wonderful. She gets one probably every other day. She doesn't love them, but she does need them to keep her from itching. She's got that dry skin. And she is definitely growing, and I think that's making her skin itchy too, for sure. All right, my dear, I'm going to put you down. Ready? All right, I just wanted to show you guys the little Dot. She's just adorable. She loves going outside. She's so cute when she's frolicking. Tony says she's so cute. Indeed, she is. Oh, Adrian's here. Yay, she gave me a little poop emoji this time. Wonderful. Thank you very much. I appreciate the super chat. Helen Dale. Yes, that was a person. That was the person that Sargon of Akkad was talking to. The kids can't learn because they're not taught how to learn from their parents because they were never taught properly either. It is very much a generational issue. When you're not taught how to think critically or how to teach yourself how to learn, it's a serious problem and definitely not something you can fix for your kids. Chooch Magooch says, the parents don't care, the kids don't care, the teachers are woke morons, there's no chance. That is a very negative way of looking at this. I personally just feel very bad that these kids are being so horrifically failed. They don't need to be failed in this way. I honestly think that if you gave them teachers that actually cared about them, the kids would care too. Almost doesn't even matter if the parents care too much, because if both parents are working and they just hand their kid over to the school for 8 hours a day, it really mostly matters if you have a teacher who really cares. The problem is that the cost of living is very, very high sometimes in these cities, and both parents often need to work, if indeed the dad is even present. And if the dad isn't present, then the mom is working, so there's no one at home anyway, so someone has to keep an eye on the kids. It's not a good situation, but it's the way it is. I don't think it's a case of the parents not caring. I also don't think it's a case of the kids not caring either. I think it's just the teachers. I think it's entirely their fault, 100%. If you know anything about teachers' unions, you certainly would agree. These kids can't learn. No, see, I disagree with you 100%. And I don't think that I'm wrong either, because we know for a fact that these standards were higher a few decades ago. We have seen a fall, and it's because of the teachers. Teachers aren't trained to teach children how to think, and they are given the protection of teachers' unions who don't at all care about the kids, as we saw during COVID. We have abundant evidence showing that these teachers' unions protect teachers who are awful at their jobs, and they only lobby in favor of the teachers, even at the negativity of the students they lose as a result. Hellendale, yes, correct. It is a disgusting cycle. I'm very sorry to see it. I hope that something better will come for Baltimore. I really hope that Baltimore starts to think much more carefully about who they elect. Yep, a consistently successful system of education is a two-tiered machine, at home with parents that actually care to encourage and help their kids with their journey, and at school with teachers. Yes, says Johnny. If you are going to send your kid to school, then you still have a role to play in your kids' lives. You still have to make sure that they're ready to learn. And you need to be teaching them the right kind of critical thinking that helps them to learn in the classroom and outside. My dad especially was really good about teaching his kids to read. Now, we were homeschooled, but my dad's task was to teach us to read, and then later followed up with us teaching us like multiplication tables and stuff like that. And my mom taught us the majority of the rest of our other topics. Love the pets. Yes, they are adorable. Andy says, wow, that is a big job. Abigail Carpenter lists often quotes from somewhere. Every child is born with a loaf of bread under its arm. Yes, it's actually from Andrew Clavin. Andrew Clavin says every child is born with a loaf of bread in its mouth, which means as soon as your kid is born, you're going to find a fire under your bottom to make things happen. And parents are uniquely adaptable to make miracles happen for their children. 100%. Yay, Adrian. I'm glad she's here. We have a hot dog emoji. Thank you. And we also have a puppy emoji. Adrian going crazy with the emojis in the super chats. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. These stickers are so dumb, she says. I love them for sure. The continued support from Adrian Curry and all the rest of y'all is such a great motivation for us to keep going. 100%. Keenan says, I had a great conversation with an older truck driver who liked Trump on a bus in Colorado. Interesting. Good times. And he says, LOL, thank you for the stickers from your iPhone. Keenan says, can we get a link to Adrian's channel? Adrian does a lot of streaming over on Facebook, and I also saw her one time on Instagram. So if you follow her over there, let me see what her Instagram is. Sour Patch Lit. Instagram's annoying because you have to be logged in. She's also, okay. So at Adrian Curry on Instagram, I think she live streams over there too, for sure. Stuart says, kids are like sponges when it comes to learning. They just need real direction by real parents and teachers who care about their development. Yes. And I'm not a blank slate theorist. I don't think that kids are born with a completely blank slate. I think a lot of it is down to their parents and how they're raised. But at the same time, I think that they are very much naturally curious. That would be very difficult to disprove at all, for sure. OCB, thank you very much for your super chat, sir. He says, for this young couple, you may be referring to Dip and Dot, or you may be referring to myself and Andy. In either case, thank you so much for your support. I appreciate it. Adrian says, I don't stream anything, I watch. I am the watcher. Dun, dun, dun. I appreciate that, Adrian. You should stream. I had a great time watching you when you were streaming. A lot of fun. She's a very entertaining character. Johnny says, the watcher who looks over the multiverse. That's correct. I love it. All right, guys, it is now shortly after 7. We are about to have Taco Tuesday. Andy, better get things going. Last time he made the ground beef and I prepared everything else. We're a great team. Came up with a great taco casserole, one of my favorite dishes from when I was growing up. So I think we're probably going to do that again tonight. But yeah, it's 7 p.m. It's getting late, so I'm going to go make food for my husband. Thank you guys all for joining me and Dot, apparently, who's chewing on cables as we speak. So I better go put a stop to that. I will see you all tomorrow. Same time, same place. All right. Bye, guys. How's it going?